So I got the orders from Vietnam at the, I think it was either October or November of '68. So I came home for a month, had to figure out how to break it to my mother.
Well, I think originally you said you stayed in Germany until '68, right?
Yeah.
November of '68.
Yeah. So I got home and I had to figure out how to tell my mother I was going to Vietnam as an infantryman.
Right.
So they would, I was telling them that, I go into Fort Lewis, Washington to be reassigned. So shortly after I got home, my father, who was a combat veteran, he was in the South Pacific. He was an Army medic attached to the Seabees. He was on Guadalcanal, and he was, so he had the experience. I was out with him one day and said, "Dad, I have to talk to you." He says, "What's that?" I said, "The reason I'm going to Fort Lewis, Washington is I've gotten orders for Vietnam. And I don't know how to tell Mom." My father says, "She already knows." I says, "Well, how did she know?" She says, "Well, she was talking to somebody else and said, well, he's on his way to Fort Lewis, Washington." And that other person said, "Oh, that's the staging area for sending people to Vietnam."
Right.
So later on that day, we sat down and had a frank discussion that I was heading into a combat zone. I was an infantryman. I was going to be in combat.
Yep.
And, this is what's happening, and there's nothing I can do about it.
And how much jungle training did you receive at Fort Lewis, Washington?
Absolutely none. There was no jungle training. What we got trained with there is new equipment.
Right.
The latest stuff was in Vietnam. So we got trained on the 60. We got M60 machine gun, belt-fed machine gun. We got trained on the M16. We got trained on the M16 with the over-under grenade launcher. We got trained on Laws rockets. We didn't see a Laws rocket. In Germany, we still had the M14. We were still using bazookas.
Yep.
Okay. We had some pretty old stuff over there. When we hit Fort Lewis, Washington, this is where we learned how to use the new stuff.
Right. So Vietnam, in a way, was an active proving ground for a lot of stuff. High-tech equipment.
For a lot of stuff.
For the Army, the Air Force, the Navy.
Luckily, when I got to Vietnam, they had already figured out the problem with the receiver in the M16, and it was jamming up because it wasn't chrome-plated, and so they had figured that out, and so the M16 was a little more reliable by the time I got to Vietnam.
So you're coming from Germany, where you were issued an M14,
yeah, beautiful
which is
rifle.
a big, heavy rifle.
Big, heavy, powerful rifle.
And you're handed the new plastic, essentially, M16.
Made by Mattel.
So, how do they compare, in your experience?
As an assault rifle, the M16 was faster, lighter, smaller caliber, but with especially, see, I know ballistics, so it had specially designed bullets so when it hit you, it would tumble. So it may hit you here, but it might come out here.
Right.
Okay, it may hit you here, come out here. The bullet would tumble inside you and do a lot of damage.
Right.
Where the M14 was a very high-powered rifle with very hard-hitting bullet, but that bullet would go straight through you. So as a close combat rifle, the M16 was probably better.
Right.
As a dependable rifle, the 14 was much better. The M14 you could pick up, throw it in the water, pick it up, throw it in the mud, pick it up and shoot it. You ever did that with a 16, you'd be sitting there, because the tolerances were much tighter.
Sure.
You'd be sitting there cleaning it for 3 hours before you could shoot it.
Right.
So as a dependable weapon, that's why the AK-47 is such a good gun, because it's built sloppy.
Right.
All right, and so it'll shoot no matter how dirty it gets. The 14 was the same way.
Sure. And there are pictures of troopers in Afghanistan. Some of them are carrying modernized M14s.
Yeah, the new M14
Right.
AEs or something like that.
EBR, Enhanced
EBR,
Battlefield Rifle, yeah. So it's gone high-tech.
Yeah. But that was neither here nor there when I hit country. I left Fort Lewis, Washington on a civilian charter flight. Civilian captain, civilian stewardesses, nowadays flight attendants.
So you got a bunch of guys sitting on an airliner, dressed in olive drab.
It was worse coming home. I'll tell you later.
And
yeah, and we're heading off to Vietnam on this, last bastion of Americanism, as we put it later. That we got stewardesses, we got a civilian captain, we got them walking up and down, giving us food, coffee,
Right. Those conversations must have been interesting.
Yeah. I land in Vietnam, in Quy Nhon, which was central Vietnam, coastline, central Vietnam. And the screaming and yelling at you like basic training, that was gone. That was gone. But they took us from there and they brought us into a holding unit until they decided which unit you were going to go to.
Right. And you eventually end up with the 4th ID.
4th Infantry Division.
51st Battalion, Company B.
Yep. And stationed in An Khê, base camp was in An Khê, Vietnam Central Highlands.
Right. And why is the 4th Infantry Division famous?
Because they captured
Saddam.
Saddam. It was my guys that got him.
And
believe me, my guys are used to crawling into little holes. So.
An Khê is famous for what?
Well, there's a story, if that's what you mean.
Well, I'm sure you have a story, but is it... An Khê sounds like a very familiar Vietnam name, and it escapes me at the moment.
I don't remember what I don't remember anything about it being famous for something, but it might have been famous for something during when the French was there or something. I don't know. But
be that as it may.
Be that as it may, yeah. So we hit An Khê, we get into the basic unit, and I get into Company B, and we start doing basic. Patrols in the jungle. Well, actually, we were in the Central Highlands, so it was more rainforest than jungle, but I suppose there ain't much of a difference.
Sure.
But being low man on the totem pole, what do I get? I get the grenade launcher. Big, bulky thing with a barrel that's friggin' big. And each round, I'd say, weighed a pound.
So you've got what looks like this little tiny shotgun contraption.
Yep. Breaks open one
open.
shot at a time,
Right.
close it. They were nice and gave me a sidearm too. All right, but I didn't have a 16.
And that concludes segment number 1 of our conversation with Rick Schultz and his experiences in the combat zones of Vietnam. I hope you'll join us again for the second segment. Thank you for watching. I'm Bob DeToma. Remember, we're all living history right now.